the early hours of June 13th, 2025, explosions echoed across Tehran. Within minutes, Israeli fighter aircraft and long-range and precision weapons struck multiple targets across Iran. Air defense systems opened fire as military headquarters, missile facilities, and nuclear-related sites came under attack. Senior Iranian military commanders and nuclear scientists were among those reported killed. For the first time in decades of shadow warfare, Israel had launched a large-scale direct military operation deep inside Iranian territory. The strikes marked the beginning of the most dangerous confrontation ever fought directly between Israel and Iran. For years, both countries had fought through proxy groups, intelligence operations, cyber attacks, and covert missions, but now the conflict had moved into open warfare. Around the world, governments feared that the fighting could expand into a wider regional war involving multiple countries across the Middle East. To understand why this happened, we must look back decades. Since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, relations between Israel and Iran steadily deteriorated. Iran refused to recognize Israel and expanded support for armed groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Israel, meanwhile, viewed Iran's growing missile capabilities and advancing nuclear program as major threats to its national security. Over the years, both sides accused one another of sabotage, assassinations, cyber operations, and attacks carried out through regional allies rather than direct military confrontation. Following the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023 and the regional conflicts that followed, tensions increased dramatically. Iranian-backed groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen launched attacks against Israeli or U.S. interests, while Israel carried out repeated strikes against Iranian-linked military infrastructure across the region. Diplomatic efforts continued, but distrust between the two countries only deepened. By early 2025, international concern had shifted once again toward Iran's nuclear activities. Western governments and the International Atomic Energy Agency continued raising questions about uranium enrichment and nuclear transparency. Negotiations between the United States and Iran were scheduled to continue in Oman, but events soon overtook diplomacy. Israel argued that Iran's expanding nuclear capabilities posed an unacceptable security risk and decided to launch what it described as a preemptive operation against military and nuclear targets. Israeli aircraft struck multiple locations, including facilities associated with Iran's nuclear program, missile production, and military command. Israeli officials stated that the objective was to degrade Iran's ability to develop advanced weapons and conduct future attacks. Iranian authorities condemned the strikes as an act of aggression and promised a decisive response. Reports also indicated that several senior military leaders and nuclear scientists had been killed during the opening hours of the operation. Within hours, Iran launched large numbers of ballistic missiles and drones toward Israel. Air raid sirens sounded across Israeli cities as air defense systems, including Iron Dome and other missile defense networks, attempted to intercept incoming projectiles. While many missiles were intercepted, others struck populated areas and military-related locations, causing casualties and damage. The long-feared direct exchange between the two regional powers had become reality. As the fighting intensified, the international community called for immediate restraint. Oil markets reacted sharply, airlines diverted flights, and governments across the region prepared for the possibility of a wider conflict. Yet neither Israel nor Iran showed signs of backing down. Instead, both sides prepared for further strikes that would soon draw another major power directly into the war. That power was the United States. Within hours of Israel's opening strikes, Iran began one of the largest missile and drone attacks in its modern military history. Waves of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and long-range drones were launched toward Israel from Iranian territory. Air raid sirens echoed across Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba as millions of civilians rushed into bomb shelters. Israeli air defense systems, including Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow 2, and Arrow 3, worked alongside U.S. naval and regional missile defense assets to intercept incoming threats. Although a large number of missiles and drones were intercepted, several penetrated Israel's layered defenses. Residential neighborhoods, infrastructure, and military-related facilities were struck, causing casualties and damage. Emergency responders worked through the night searching collapsed buildings, while hospitals treated the wounded. The conflict had entered a dangerous phase in which both nations were now exchanging direct attacks on an unprecedented scale. Israel responded with additional waves of airstrikes targeting Iran's military infrastructure. Fighter aircraft struck missile launch sites, Revolutionary Guard facilities, weapons depots, radar installations, command centers, and air defense systems. Israeli officials stated that the objective was to reduce Iran's ability to continue launching missiles and to weaken its long-range strike capability before even larger attacks could be organized. One of Israel's primary concerns remained Iran's nuclear program. Israeli leaders argued that allowing Iran to continue expanding its uranium enrichment capabilities would create an unacceptable long-term security threat. During the campaign, strikes were reported against facilities associated with Iran's nuclear infrastructure, although independent experts later assessed that while some sites suffered significant damage, not all underground facilities had been completely destroyed. As the fighting intensified, attention turned toward Washington. The United States had repeatedly stated that it did not seek a wider regional war, but it also reaffirmed its commitment to Israel's security. American naval forces in the eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf increased their readiness. Additional fighter aircraft, missile defense batteries, surveillance aircraft, and aerial refueling tankers were deployed to strengthen regional deterrence and protect U.S. personnel. Despite international efforts to prevent further escalation, the conflict continued expanding. Intelligence assessments warned that prolonged fighting could threaten shipping routes, energy infrastructure, and U.S. military bases across the Middle East. As missile exchanges continued, American leaders faced growing pressure to decide whether the United States should remain in a defensive role or directly participate in military operations against Iran. That decision came only days later. On the night of June 21st to 22nd, 2025, the United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer, its largest direct military strike against Iranian nuclear facilities. American B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flew long-range missions carrying GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bombs designed specifically to destroy deeply buried underground targets. Simultaneously, U.S. Navy submarines launched Tomahawk cruise missiles against additional objectives. The operation targeted three of Iran's most significant nuclear sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. U.S. officials stated that the mission aimed to severely damage Iran's uranium enrichment and nuclear infrastructure while avoiding broader civilian targets. The strikes represented one of the most sophisticated conventional air operations conducted by the United States in recent years. Iran strongly condemned the attacks and declared that both Israel and the United States would face consequences. Iranian military leaders warned that American bases throughout the Middle East were now considered legitimate military targets. Around the region, U.S. forces entered their highest levels of alert as commanders prepared for possible retaliation against troops stationed in Iraq, Syria, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and elsewhere. For the first time in decades, three major military powers, the United States, Israel, and Iran, had become directly involved in the same conflict. Around the world, diplomats feared that one additional mistake or miscalculation could ignite a much wider regional war involving multiple countries. The coming days would determine whether the fighting continued to escalate or whether diplomacy could prevent an even greater catastrophe. The American strikes on Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan marked a turning point in the conflict. For the first time, the United States had directly attacked Iran's nuclear infrastructure rather than limiting its role to supporting Israel's missile defenses. Washington stated that the operation was intended to reduce Iran's nuclear capabilities, not to overthrow the Iranian government or begin a broader war. Even so, military planners across the Middle East immediately prepared for retaliation. Iranian leaders condemned the attacks as a violation of international law and warned that the United States had crossed a dangerous line. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei declared that Iran would defend itself against what he described as foreign aggression. Military commanders from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that American military installations across the region were now within Iran's range and that a response would come at a time of Tehran's choosing. Just days later, Iran launched missiles toward Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American military installation in the Middle East. The base serves as a major command center for U.S. air operations throughout the region. Thanks to advance warning and extensive missile defense preparations, many incoming missiles were intercepted, while others caused limited damage. According to U.S. and Qatari officials, there were no reported American fatalities during the attack. Although the strike demonstrated Iran's ability to reach American forces across the region, many analysts believed it was carefully calibrated, rather than causing mass casualties that could trigger a wider war. The attack appeared designed to send a political and military message while avoiding an uncontrollable escalation. Even so, military commanders remained on high alert, fearing that additional strikes or miscalculations could rapidly expand the conflict. Throughout the crisis, commercial airlines rerouted flights away from the Middle East as airspace restrictions expanded across several countries. Oil prices rose sharply amid concerns that the fighting could threaten energy supplies moving through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important maritime trade routes. Governments urged their citizens to avoid travel to the region, while diplomats intensified effort to prevent further escalation. Meanwhile, international pressure for a ceasefire grew stronger. The United Nations, European governments, Gulf states, and other world powers called for an immediate halt to military operations. Behind closed doors, diplomatic contacts continued through multiple channels. Although neither Israel nor Iran publicly signaled a willingness to compromise, both sides were facing increasing military, economic, and political costs as the conflict continued. After nearly 2 weeks of intense fighting, a ceasefire was announced. Missile launches gradually decreased, Israeli air operations slowed, and both governments claimed they had achieved important military objectives. Israel argued that it had significantly damaged Iran's missile and nuclear infrastructure. Iran, meanwhile, declared that it had demonstrated its ability to strike Israeli territory directly and confront both Israel and the United States despite overwhelming military pressure. Independent assessments suggested that Iran's nuclear facilities had suffered substantial damage, particularly at above-ground infrastructure. While the full extent of damage to deeply buried underground facilities remain the subject of continuing analysis, military experts also noted that although important infrastructure had been destroyed, long-term assessments would be required to determine how significantly Iran's nuclear program had been delayed. The conflict also highlighted the growing importance of modern warfare: precision-guided missiles, long-range drones, stealth bombers, cyber capabilities, intelligence gathering, and integrated air defense systems all played central roles. Unlike many 20th century wars fought through massive ground invasions, the 2025 conflict demonstrated how future wars between advanced militaries could be shaped by technology, long-range strikes, and rapid decision-making. Although the ceasefire ended the immediate fighting, few observers believe the underlying rivalry had been resolved. The question surrounding Iran's nuclear ambitions, Israel's security concerns, regional proxy groups, and the role of the United States in the Middle East remained unanswered. The 2025 war may have ended, but the strategic competition that produced it continues to shape the region's future. The conflict of 2025 became one of the most significant military confrontations in the Middle East in recent decades. It demonstrated how years of proxy warfare, nuclear disputes, intelligence operations, and regional rivalries could rapidly evolve into direct military conflict involving three major powers. Whether the ceasefire marks the beginning of lasting stability or merely a pause before another crisis remains uncertain. What is clear is that the events of 2025 have permanently changed the security landscape of the Middle East and will continue to influence global politics for years to come.